On November 22, 1977, passengers boarded a needle-nosed aircraft unlike anything they'd seen before. The Concorde was about to make its first commercial transatlantic crossing, promising something that seemed impossible: breakfast in London, lunch in New York, all before the sun caught up. At twice the speed of sound, it would slash Atlantic crossing times by more than half. This wasn't just an airplane. It was a vision of the future, where distance would no longer dictate time, where the world would shrink beneath the roar of afterburners. The Concorde was a triumph of engineering ambition. Its delta wing design, crafted from specialized aluminum alloy, had to withstand temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Celsius as friction heated the fuselage during supersonic flight. The aircraft would actually expand by nearly 10 inches in cruise. For Rolls-Royce Olympus engines, equipped with afterburners, generated the thrust needed to push through the sound barrier. The distinctive droop nose allowed pilots to see during takeoff and landing, then retracted for aerodynamic efficiency. Every system was pushed to the absolute edge of what 1960s and 70s technology could achieve. Flying the Concorde wasn't just travel, it was a status symbol. Tickets cost more than first class on conventional aircraft, often exceeding $8,000 for a round trip. The passenger list read like a who's who of the elite, business tycoons, celebrities, royalty, and world leaders. The cabin itself was narrow and utilitarian compared to modern luxury jets, but passengers weren't paying for space. They were paying for time, for exclusivity, for the privilege of saying they'd flown faster than a rifle bullet. For 3 decades, the Concorde represented the absolute pinnacle of commercial aviation. But beneath the glamour, the Concorde faced a fundamental problem: it made no economic sense. The aircraft could carry only 100 passengers, compared to over 300 on a Boeing 747. It consumed massive amounts of fuel, burning through 2 tons per passenger on a transatlantic flight, roughly 5 times more than conventional jets. Development costs had ballooned to well over £1 billion by the time it entered service. Only 20 aircraft were ever built. Both British Airways and Air France, the sole operators, relied heavily on government subsidies to keep the program viable. The comparison with conventional aircraft was stark. Where a Boeing 747 could carry hundreds of passengers profitably across the Atlantic, burning fuel efficiently at subsonic speeds, the Concorde served a tiny niche market. Airlines could operate multiple 747 flights for the cost of a single Concorde route. The supersonic jet required specialized maintenance, unique parts, and specially trained crews. While conventional jets became cheaper to operate with each generation, the Concorde's costs remained stubbornly high. The economics simply didn't scale. Then there was the sonic boom. When an aircraft breaks the sound barrier, it creates a shockwave that follows the plane like a wake behind a boat. For those on the ground, it sounds like thunder or an explosion. The Concorde's sonic boom was powerful enough to rattle windows and disturb entire communities. By the early 1970s, most countries had banned supersonic flight over land. The Concorde was restricted to oceanic routes, primarily the transatlantic corridor between New York, London, and Paris. This single restriction eliminated most potential routes and markets, forever limiting the aircraft's commercial viability. As environmental awareness grew through the 1980s and 90s, the Concorde became an increasingly difficult symbol to defend. Its fuel consumption was astronomical by any standard. Environmental groups pointed out that a single Concorde flight produced more carbon emissions per passenger than driving across the country. There were also concerns about the aircraft's impact on the ozone layer, as it cruised at altitudes of 60,000 feet, higher than conventional jets. In an era of growing climate consciousness, the Concorde looked less like progress and more like excess. The market for supersonic travel proved far smaller than anticipated. Initial projections suggested hundreds of aircraft would be needed to meet demand. In reality, only a handful of routes could sustain Concorde service, and only a tiny fraction of travelers were willing to pay the premium. Business executives, the primary target market, increasingly turned to emerging technologies like mobile phones, laptops, and later the internet, which allowed them to work productively during longer conventional flights. The value proposition of saving 3 hours began to erode as in-flight connectivity improved and business culture evolved. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 took off from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport bound for New York. During takeoff, a piece of debris on the runway punctured a tire. Fragments of rubber struck the fuel tank, causing a catastrophic leak and fire. The aircraft crashed into a hotel just 90 seconds after departure, killing all 109 people on board and 4 on the ground. It was the Concorde's first and only fatal accident in 24 years of service. The crash shattered the aircraft's safety reputation and raised profound questions about its aging airframe. All Concorde aircraft were immediately grounded pending investigation. The crash investigation revealed vulnerabilities in the fuel tank design that had existed since the aircraft's inception. Both British Airways and Air France implemented extensive modifications, reinforced fuel tanks, burst-resistant tires, improved wiring. The aircraft returned to service in November 2001, but the damage was done. Public confidence had been shaken. Bookings, already declining before the crash, fell further. The post-9/11 aviation slump compounded the problem, devastating premium travel demand just as the Concorde needed it most. The Concorde limped through its final years. Airbus, which had absorbed the original manufacturers, announced it would no longer support the aircraft with spare parts. The planes were aging, their unique components increasingly difficult to maintain. Both airlines faced the prospect of skyrocketing maintenance costs for a fleet that was barely profitable even in the best of times. The September 11 attacks and subsequent aviation downturn had eliminated what little margin remained. By 2003, the writing was on the wall. The supersonic dream had become an unsustainable burden. The statistics tell the story of an aircraft ahead of its time, but behind the economics. 27 years of commercial service. 20 aircraft built. Millions of passengers carried, but never enough to justify the costs. 3.5-hour Atlantic crossings that dazzled the imagination but couldn't overcome the fundamental mathematics of airline operation. The Concorde's numbers were impressive in every way except the ones that mattered most: profitability and sustainability. On October 24, 2003, British Airways operated the last commercial Concorde flight from New York to London. Thousands gathered to watch the final landing. Air France had retired its fleet weeks earlier. The aircraft taxied to a stop as cameras flashed and crowds cheered, a bittersweet celebration of an extraordinary machine that had outlived its era. The retirement marked the first time since the dawn of the jet age that commercial flight had actually become slower. We had reached for the future, touched it briefly, and then stepped back. The end of Concorde service meant more than the retirement of an aircraft. It represented the end of a particular kind of ambition, the belief that technology would inevitably push us faster, higher, further. As one aviation historian noted, the Concorde was a machine built not because it made economic sense, but because nations believed they should reach for what seemed impossible. That spirit of audacious engineering, divorced from commercial calculation, would not return to commercial aviation. The Concorde remains the last supersonic passenger jet ever to enter regular service. So why did the Concorde fail? The answer lies in the collision between engineering triumph and economic reality. It was too expensive to operate, too limited in routes, too small in capacity, and too environmentally costly for an era of climate awareness. The crash exposed aging vulnerabilities. The post-2001 travel decline eliminated the luxury market it depended upon. But perhaps most fundamentally, the Concorde failed because the world it was designed for, a world where pure speed commanded unlimited premium, never fully materialized. Business travelers learned to work in flight. Video conferencing reduced the urgency of face-to-face meetings. Today, Concordes rest in museums around the world, monuments to an audacious dream. They stand as reminders that technological capability doesn't guarantee commercial success, that pushing boundaries requires more than engineering brilliance. Several companies are now developing new supersonic aircraft, hoping to succeed where Concorde failed by using modern materials, efficient engines, and designs that mitigate sonic booms. Whether they'll overcome the same economic and environmental barriers remains to be seen. The Concorde taught the aviation industry an expensive lesson: sometimes, slower is more sustainable. The dream of supersonic commercial travel hasn't died, it's merely hibernating. Companies like Boom Supersonic and Airliner are developing new aircraft that promise to avoid Concorde's pitfalls: quieter sonic booms that might permit overland flight, more efficient engines that reduce environmental impact, and larger capacity to improve economics. They're betting that advances in materials science, computer modeling, and engine technology can solve problems that defeated 1960s engineers. Whether these new ventures succeed or follow Concorde into history depends on whether they can reconcile speed with economics, ambition with sustainability. The Concorde's failure illuminated the path. The question is whether anyone can successfully walk it.